Let's see. When do I go live? Oh, I think I'm live. Let me just make sure. The idea is to be live. Boom. Okay. So here we are in another meaningless class, right? Why do I even do this? I
Here
don't
we
know.
are.
But it seems important. That's why. Because nobody knows. Nobody knows about this stuff. So that's why. That's why I'm talking about it. So as you may know, um, I did a class, I don't know when, back in February maybe, called the Reality Code. The Reality Code, and the Reality Code is based on the idea that the elements, classical elements, earth, water, air, fire, akasha, are the literal keys to reality. And I believe that. However, the funny thing is that the Tattvas, these Tattva things, Tattvas, what the hell are they? What are the Tattvas? Well, let me tell you. What they are. Well, let's have a look at them first of all, right? Because this is a big graphic, right? And it can be confusing looking at graphics, thusly. Okay, so what we've got down in the bottom here is we've got the classical elements: earth, water, fire, air, space, also known as akasha, right? Above this, we've got the subtle elements. Now, this is interesting. Subtle elements: odor, flavor, appearance, tactility, and sound. The next up, we've got organs of action: bowels, genitals, feet, hands, mouth. Organs of cognition: nose, tongue, eye, skin, ear. Internal organs: intelligence, ego, mind. And then after this, we go up into sort of more sort of spiritual place up above here, right? Um, so it seems in some ways, looking at this, it seems like, wow, that's a lot of, it's a lot of understandings to sort of cognize, right? A lot of understandings to cognize with this graphic because for sure, there's a lot of information there, but it's actually not as complicated as it seems. And there's also, there's some interesting. I mean, like, who comes up with this stuff, right? I mean, where does this all come from? And uh, and also, one thing is this is these ideas are coming from Kashmir Shaivism, which is like the Shiva worshiper people from tantric tradition from Kashmir, right? Supposedly. Okay, and in this page here, this is the religion Wikia. There's some really good discussions about all of these things. So it goes through all of these things. Now, on the main graphic, which I'm showing, it's just using like standard English nomenclature: earth, water, air, fire, space. But on this one, it goes back to the I mean, it's still talking about the same things, but they're using some of the sort of more Hindu tantric nomenclature: Prithvi, Jaha, Tehas, Vahu, Vayu, and Akasa. Oh, there you go. There's Akasha, right? And so, and then what's interesting is like things which we might take for granted, like, and this is the funny thing because you take it for granted is the subtle elements: odor, flavor, appearance, tactility, and sound. It's really easy to take that stuff for granted because we're so accustomed to using this, right? Um, Actually, well, those concepts are very, very familiar to us, right? Um, but here they're actually identified as tanmatras: Gandha, Rasa, Rupu, Sparsa, and Sabda, right? And so, but the interesting thing about this is look at how they're discussed. So this is the transit medium for olfactive impressions, the transit medium for taste sensations. Think about what that means. What it's actually saying is saying there's a medium, there's some kind of substance which permits the transmission of the knowledge of scent, of taste, of sight, sound, and of hearing. Now, it's interesting because, like, to be honest with you, some of the stuff it says here like took me by surprise because I've got my own way of sort of understanding this stuff, and then when you read somebody else's understanding, and this is obviously I'm tend not to be good with details, and this is obviously very detailed, so it puts my own ideas into sort of into contrast, so I can sort of try and understand them better. Um, No. One thing I would say to you is, and I'm just going to say this really quickly because it just, and it's just because it's important, I guess, is this. Now, there's some of this stuff I'm not completely understanding yet, but let me just show you something quickly. Um, I'm just changing the screen here. Yep. Here we go. Okay. Boom. Okay. Same graphic, different program. Yeah. Can I move that in a bit more? There we go. Yeah. Okay. So, same graphic, different program. So what I would say to you, and I've got a pencil here so I can draw, is now I'm going to skip this part here just for a second. Let me just, do I have a pen? Pen? Is this going to work? Yeah, there we go. I'm going to skip this part because I'm not 100% on this one yet. But it seems like, wow, there's so many levels I've got to go through to get to like enlightenment, because you got to like work through all this stuff and then come up here and move up through this section. And it's like, wow, that's really intimidating. There's so much stuff. There's so much stuff, but that's actually not really true. So here's the deal. Is this, do I have another color here? Yes. Well, I'm in Earth. Well, Earth element's red, so that's good. We'll just use Earth. Okay. So like this, I'm just going to draw a straight line through here. All these things are related. Now, I'm not sure if this stuff's related yet. It may well be, right? Actually, it is. Um, Feet, appearance, fire. Yeah, you know what? It probably is. It probably is completely related. Now that I think about it, yeah. Let me just erase that, and I can keep this. I can keep this as it is. Okay. Okay. So these are all related, right? So now what's interesting is in that description, that text which I'm showing you, they actually describe that the earth element, new color. I need a new color here. Hold on a second. Here, gray. They actually say that the earth element emerges from odor. Now, this was different than my own understandings of how this works. And it's really interesting, specifically, and it's not really just putting my own ideas into contrast. It's putting like people like Franz Bardon into contrast because Franz Bardon and many other magical practices, and frankly, um, even in Tantra and everything, I mean, basically, the gross elements of earth, water, fire, air, and space are often considered to be like the primordial thing. So I've often discussed like earth, water, air, and fire are actually they're actually segmentations of God. And you can come up with that based on the idea that the Jewish word for God, Yod He Vahe, means earth, water, air, and fire. Um, Apparently. And so, like, the elements have been considered, and I've considered them to be like the founding principles of consciousness itself. Um, However, that other document is actually saying that these elements emerge from the, what are they called? They call them the Tatmatras. What do they call them? They're called the Tanmatras. Tanmatras. So what they're saying is that Tanmatras emerge, or the Tanmatras produce the gross elements, which are called the Mahabhutas. Mahabhutas. Okay. It actually doesn't matter. I mean, the thing is, you can get caught up and confused by the Hindu terminology, and none of it is really important. I mean, it gives you a sense of authenticity if you can use that language, I guess, but it's completely irrelevant as far as understanding consciousness is concerned. So that's what they're saying. They're saying this stuff emerges from here. But what I'm saying, and that, in a way, it's an interesting way of thinking about it. And oftentimes, the way you have to don't believe it. What you have to do is you have to meditate into it and see if it's valid, right? Anyway, so what I'm saying is all these things, each of these areas, womp, womp, womp. It seems like there's four levels of understanding you have to go through. And wow, that's a lot of work. Because, frankly, I've been working on the gross elements for, several years, right? Just becoming really fluid, like understanding how to move through consciousness using the elements. So, wow, how many years do I have to do to go through this stuff? And the answer is not that much, actually, because the the contemplations of this stuff are actually pretty straightforward. Uh, really straightforward. Obviously, like the nose and odor, I mean, those are really related, obviously, by default, right? I mean, that's an easy connection to make, right? The nose and odor are connected. Now, what's interesting about it is if you think about the nose and odor, dude, it's insane. It's insane. Think about think about the nose and odor for a bit, right? It's crazy. Like, first of all, what is odor? Now, in the other document, I'm just going to switch back to the other document for a second. Where is that? That's here. Um, I'm sorry this may seem a little disjointed, but I'm trying to I'm trying to do this shit right. Hold on a second. 36 Tattvas. Okay, bump. Okay. So let me just go where this is. The transit medium of olfactory impressions. Taste in itself creates Jala Tattva. Okay, so it creates, wait, oh, that's taste. Am I in taste? Okay, I'm here in taste sensations. Okay, so Prithvi Tattva is the, bump, Prithvi, where are we? Don't, I'm just searching here. Prithvi Tattva is produced by Granda Tattva, the medium for, so what they're saying here is the earth element is produced by the medium for olfactory sensations. So they're saying it's produced by, it is the abode of Kundalini Shakti, the energy that resides in the potentiality at the base of the spinal column. Kundalini Shakti is identical to Parashakti when it emerges and rises to the top chakra. According to Sadhavan, the material world is created by Prakasa, spiritual light, uncreated light. Kashmir Shaivism describes reflection of the top principle, Shiva Tattva, right into the lowest principle, Prithi Tattva. So the funny thing is about these the elements, and what they're actually saying here, the reflection of Shiva Tattva into the Prithi Tattva. So what I was saying previously, like the elements are actually God Himself, like separated into like four branches. That's actually what they're saying here. They're saying that the earth element is the literal reflection of Shiva, right? From the highest into a sort of lower vibrational state, right? It signifies concreteness, stability, patience, strength, abundance, nurturing, protection, symbolized by Mother Earth. This blah, 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 right? Um, but the important thing here is that they're literally saying that this is Shiva, but like reflection and therefore lower intensity, uh, a lower intensity version of the of Shiva, right? Now this is interesting because what that means is like if you meditate on the earth element as a perfect reflection of Shiva, then what's going to happen? Obviously, you're going to make connection with Shiva, right? It's just what happens, right? Or God, whatever you want to say. I'm just using the terminology here. God, Shiva, whatever. Now, of course, what's interesting about this, of course, is that this supposedly emerges from smell. That means your sense of smell is Shiva also, right? And that, now just consider what that means for a minute. because this your sense of smell is one of the fundamental things we take for granted, right? Because like something like the earth element, that's really abstract, right? To wrap your head around, okay, the earth element, that's really abstract, but the sense of smell is really common. I mean, it's really easy to wrap your mind around what the sense of smell is. The difficult part is recognizing or believing that that might be God, right? My sense of smell is God? Are you kidding me? And then once you've sort of grokked that, to move up to the nose and recognize that it's an organ of cognition. So when we take the nose for granted, generally, right? I mean, it's just like a part of my face, whatever. But if you start thinking about your nose as being specifically designed by God, it's specific design by God Himself in order to permit the transit of the medium of olfactory impressions or the smell, right? So the nose, and I'm telling you, the way to work with this, because it seems kind of like, listen, it may seem stilted and intellectual, right? But that's not the point here. I'm not big with knowledge, and I'm not good with keeping track of details. I'm not famous for that, right? It's not a strength. So that's not what this is about. What I am good at is seeing relationships between things, right? I tend to be good at that. And so the way to work with this is you have to sort of suspend your disbelief and meditate into this stuff because it might seem like it's improbable, right? It might seem improbable um, until you meditate into it. Because once you meditate into it, this stuff becomes revealed. Now, what it is a lot of times when you're meditating, you sort of come up with hypotheses. This is why they say that meditation is sort of a scientific process. You'll often hear people like Sadhguru or what we're saying, or they'll be like, "Oh, it's the science of yoga or the science of tantra." It's like, what are you talking about? But the reason they're saying it's a science is because you literally might start off with a hypothesis, then you meditate into the hypothesis, and it either gets usually what happens is usually if you have a hypothesis about consciousness, it's usually based on some kind of intuition, and a lot of times you meditate into it and it gets revealed. Often it might not be revealed as truth, but it's sometimes it's the doorway into truth, right? Or sometimes as you meditate into it, you'll be guided to the correct answer, right? So that's why discussing the olfactory medium, the transit, like thinking of the nose. So what I'm suggesting here, seriously, is meditating on the nose. But here's an interesting way of doing it, meditating on the nose. How do you meditate on the nose? Here's a way of doing it. The way, maybe I'll change the name of the video. I'll call it meditating on the nose. How do you meditate on the nose? First of all, it's really, it doesn't seem interesting talking about it, but it's friggin' amazing doing it. So one way to meditate on the nose might be to do the standard meditation of meditating on your breath, right? Now that seems like it might be like off the table here. Let me just switch to this one. Okay, we good? Yeah, we've got it. Okay. Um, because if we're meditating on the breath, we're actually moving over to somewhere else here. Like we're like over in air. Isn't meditating on the breath meditating in the air? Isn't that what's going on? Now there's an interesting group of relationships revealed by this contemplation. Let me explain it to you. So if we're meditating on the breath, but what we're doing is we're using the nose and we're actually trying to meditate on the sense of smell. Now, the funny thing about the sense of smell is it's transported seemingly by air, right? So if you're smelling something, you're you're smelling air. Is that right? Is that how it works? Are we actually smelling air? What the chart, what the other page actually suggests is that smell, the transitory medium of smell is not air. It's it's an invisible substance which has not been defined by science. Now, what science will tell you is that yeah, there are smelling buds, or there's nerve endings which can sense smell, or it's carried by the air. But what the text suggests is there is an invisible medium of smell. Now that seems a little out there and non-scientific, and I totally agree with you, but it's true that there is this medium. And you'll discover this if you meditate into this. So, but what is interesting is air certainly is something, right? Air is also some kind of transitory medium. So this is where it gets really mystical. This gets really mystical really quickly. If you can think of air traveling up through your nostrils, now air, dude, this is so insane. This is crazy. Air is the element of, well, it's the air element, but it's also the element of intelligence, right? It's also typically seen as the mediation is sort of like a mediator between the elements. So like if you get fire and water, they can only interact because of the air, right? So the air is there to sort of mediate between them. And so what's happening here is the air is also mediating. It's bringing the air, the intelligence, and this is the amazing thing because you have to start realizing the air is pure intelligence. And so when you start trying to meditate on the sense of smell, you're actually, the smell is being brought to you by a wave of pure intelligence. And this invisible material, and this is probably a good time to use the tanmatra. And you know, it's almost a good idea to use the tantric terminology, the tanmatra, because it puts a distinction on this that it's not just smell. It's a medium. What? How did they say it? It's a medium of the transit medium of olfactory impressions, right? Now, this may seem out there or like improbable, but what happens is when you become conscious of these invisible mediums of transportation of the senses, um, you discover it's true because everything becomes mystical. Because if you have enough awareness to perceive that, uh, that's the only state it's perceivable in, is in a mystical state, actually, right? So science cannot prove this, right? Period. It can't prove it. It's only achievable through meta consciousness. I'm going to call it meta consciousness, like consciousness which is non ordinary, right? So we're meditating on smell and on the nose. What's interesting about this is our first, see, it can be confusing because you've got to contemplate it at a high level. So as we breathe in through the nose, there's also a touch impression. We feel the air going in our nostrils. There's a typical Buddhist meditation is to feel the breath around the nostril, right? So you feel this breath around the nostril. You feel it going in. If you're really attuned, you can feel it going around the back and down, and then you get the soft diffusion into the lungs. What I'm pointing out here is there's also a touch sensation here, right? There's a tactility to the breath. Now, if we look here, let me just use a different color here. Air, I'm saying that the transportation, one transportation, or our method of understanding the tanmatra of the smell is air, but it's also tactility, right? So what I'm saying is that the touch sensation and the air work together. So divine intelligence works together to bring awareness of the tanmatra of smell. And the way to think about this stuff is to recognize it like as a divine as I mean, you have to sort of meditate on each property of the process and recognize it as a divine process. Because the reality is the interaction of these things. Oh, and like this one up here, this is the skin. So obviously the skin is like when you use the divine medium of air, uh, and you have a sensation of touch. Now, the sensation of touch is also a tamatra, right? And that is being mediated by the skin, right? So what's happening here is this whole section here, the whole part of the smell is being mediated by air, right? Now, when I've been talking about the elements in the past, I've often said there are elements within elements. So if you look back at my video on using tantra, uh, using tarot to meditate on elements from about a year ago, I talk about how the court cards of the tarot can be seen as elements within elements. So, for example, if you get the Queen of Swords, that's the water element inside of air, right? So you see, that's all kind of abstract, metaphorical stuff, and it's the problem with magic generally. I think is that it's so abstract. Whereas when you look at tantra, I mean, this is like located directly in your body, right? Now, so the thing is, if you locate the elements and their dynamics inside the imaginative world, which you can do, uh, it's great, but it's much more difficult to understand if you've never done it before. Whereas with Tantra, because it's located directly in the body itself, it's much more it's a much more obvious path to understanding. Okay. Um, I'm still, this section here is in some ways it's slightly more abstract than the other ones. So, but there's like a straight path, but this one's sort of more abstract, I guess, like in the understanding. So, similarly, let's go to the water element. Flavor. The flavor is also a ten matra, right? So, flavor is a transit medium. It's a transit medium for, what's the word? Rasa, the transit medium for taste sensations. Where am I? So, there's this medium, which is invisible, which is taste. Now, the funny thing about taste, if you meditate on taste, um, obviously we're going to come up against the tongue, right? Let me use a different color here. I'll use blue. Okay. We're going to come up against the tongue, right? Flavor. Okay. Water element. Now that's a bit more obvious. There's water in the mouth, right? So we can see it like that. Like, okay, there's water in the mouth. That's mediating. That mediates the identification of the flavor tamatra, which is called rasa, not to be confused with the other rasa. But obviously there's other elements involved here. Um, so for example, when I had COVID, I couldn't smell very well, and my sense of taste was interrupted. So there's some kind of connection with smell. There's also taste is often related greatly to texture, right? So that would relate over to touch again, right? Bump. It might also be related to sound, like if you're eating popcorn or something crunchy, for example, or something very soft. There are different sound qualities to these things. So the point is that time mantras function together. Now, what's interesting about these contemplations is, dude, all this stuff is located right in the head, right? So you can basically meditate on the nose and smelling and just do it for a couple of minutes. What you do is you focus on these ideas. Let me just do this here. Yeah, pink. You focus on an idea like this one, then you bounce down to order, and then you contemplate it as earth, and you bounce back and forth between these, right? Boom, boom. You bounce between them, and you just bounce back and forth. So this is like a quick contemplation. So you move between them, but the whole time you're doing this, you're contemplating the idea that this is a divine aspect. These are divine concepts. Then you bump over quickly over to the tongue. And like usually you might do this like, I mean, they're so close together, right? So just move over to the mouth and contemplate flavor. Now, the funny thing is about this is there are different levels of input. Let me use a different color here. There are different levels of input to these things, right? This represents levels of input. So, for example, if you're waking up in the morning into meditation, you might realize that the taste sensation is pretty much undefined. You're not going to have much flavor in your mouth, right? You haven't brushed your teeth, you haven't drunk coffee. You know, it might be slightly acidy or sour or just nothing, right? So there's not much taste information here generally. So it's interesting. So I'm saying that's a low bandwidth. It's a it's a low bandwidth, but it might be high. It might be a highly detailed Tamatra. It might be high resolution, as high resolution as the other ones, but it might be as high resolution as the other ones, but it's low bandwidth or it's low content. Now take the difference between this and touch. Dude, touch is massive. Touch touch is the it completely modulates our life, everything from the fit of our clothes to if we're comfortable, to our smell, to our taste. Everything is modulated by touch. So touch has a massive input. There's massive input here into touch, right? Similarly, the fire, which is the eyesight has massive input of information, right? So the transit medium, what's the transit medium of eyesight? Now, obviously, we can say it's light, but light also gets modulated by air, right? Light, that's why we get refractions. We get refractions in prisms from prisms because of the modulation. Or that's why we get rainbows, right? So there's the quality of air can create refractions. Um, and so that's something to contemplate. Like there's the tan matra of of light itself, which we would call, what do we call that? Dude, I think this is way too abstract for you guys, but I have to talk about this stuff. It's called rupa. That's the tan mantra for visual sensations. So this is huge throughput, huge throughput. Um, Smell, not so much. Taste, not so much, but they're exquisite, right? They have exquisite details. So if we decide to contemplate these ideas, like if you wake up in the morning, like this morning, I'm doing this, and I get no smell or taste. I don't really smell anything. House is clean. right? It's just neutral. So there's not much there, right? Open my eyes because I'm meditating with my eyes closed. Boom! Massive input of visual information, right? So what I can contemplate is I can contemplate how air is mediating the visual field and the smell field, right? Intelligence, divine intelligence is mediating those things. But in this moment, the inputs are varied, right? Similarly with hearing, sound in the ear also it depends. It's got limited input. I would say it's got more. Hearing tends to have more than the generally than those other two, right? Because there's often a lot of quite a lot. I think it's less than these two, but it's but more than these two generally. This is obviously variable. I'm just sort of saying generally speaking. So right now I'm sitting here. I can hear a water pump down below in the farm from the workers working down there. There's a high pitched hum, as you sometimes hear, like who knows what the hell that is. Very subtle sensation of breath. All of this stuff is being mediated by the air element, but I'm cognizing it. The cognition isn't coming through a physical thing. The cognition is coming through the 10 matra. So, what I'm saying, change color. What I'm saying is you can meditate on these ideas, boink, boink, bouncing through these different concepts. So, once you've got a handle on the elements, once you understand the elements, then what you can do is you can move between these things in a sort of a laissez-faire kind of way, right? However you might do it in a way of contemplation. And it's sort of like an array of the senses. And these senses represent what's funny about this may seem pedestrian because why is he talking about the senses? If you think this is boring because I'm talking about the senses, it's because you don't realize the senses are divinity itself. The senses are the literal tendrils of divinity in the physical world. The senses are the literal tendrils of divinity. Meditate into it if you want to discover what reality is. Now, in my experience, I'm just changing screens here. Hold on a second. In my incredible experience, um, I'm just changing screens. Hold on. Bump to this one. There we go. Okay. In my experience, oh, is this the one I want? Yeah. Okay, we're moving up here. Where's my mouse? Did my mouse break down? See, I'm using a Wacom tablet, and it's like sometimes the driver's slow. Okay, so basically, once you become fluent moving through these ideas, what you're doing when you're moving through these ideas, what you're doing is you are showing yourself almost as a kind of master of consciousness, not master of consciousness, but you're showing yourself as a sort of you're self-identifying yourself to consciousness as a player, kind of a thing, right? So it's almost like it's consciousness seems to work on reflections. And so when you self-reflect on these ideas, and it's like it's the contemplation of ideas, and not just ideas, but the divine pure states underlying those ideas. When you do that, you automatically Now, in my experience, what often happens is I'll be meditating on this stuff and I'll just, boom, I'll just fly right up here, right? Somewhere in here, sometimes up this way, sometimes a bit lower. Um, but you sometimes just, it's almost like a teleporting, boom, up to here. Now, there's, where am I here? Now, you might find when you're meditating on these ideas, you might find that, geez, Scott really is full of shit. Why does he keep talking about the senses and the elements? God damn, that guy's so full of shit, right? Um, but if you're thinking that, the reason you're thinking that is because of the five acts of consciousness, which which is discussed in the Recognition Sutras. But the five acts of consciousness are creation, emission, or the flowing forth of self-expression. So you'll be familiar with that. The second act is holding, preservation, or maintenance. You'll be familiar with that, although it's a bit more abstract. The third is dissolution, reabsorption, or retraction. Now, the way to think about this stuff is just think about it in terms of like ideas, like you know how like ideas flow through your mind, and you know, like for example, if you sit and meditate, an idea will be created. It will stay in your mind for a little while. Then maybe it will dissolve, or maybe it seems like it's dissolved, but it's still there, and that's concealment and occlusion, right? Well, how many have we got there? One, two, three, four. Where's the fifth one? Okay. And here's the next one, revealing, the revelation or grace. So these can be understood in like a sort of macro or micro perspective. What I'm saying is that at the very insertion point of consciousness, like if you start meditating on the 10 matras, on these things here, and you know, dude, you can do this. Just meditate on the nose, right? Meditate on the nose, but do it with the understanding that the nose is an organ of cognition of divinity. And approach the nose as if it was specifically architectured by divinity. It was an architected organ. It's not by accident, right? There's no part of your nose that was created by accident. It was specifically designed for your cross section with these other parts in the lineage of earth, water, fire, air, and space. The tongue also. So the amazing thing about the tongue, if you meditate on the tongue, that can get, I mean, all this stuff can get really weird because it becomes like really meta. Like when you're meditating, you want to be depersonalized, meditate on your tongue. And the more you meditate on the tongue and how it's actually a divine organ which was created to connect with the tan matra of taste, and that it is mediated by touch, and it's mediated by the water element and the smell tan matra, and by hearing tan matra. What happens is I was doing this yesterday, and all of a sudden I started getting claustrophobic. I was getting really claustrophobic because I suddenly became aware that my tongue was sort of trapped in my mouth. And it's actually, if you think about your tongue, it's actually, if your mouth is closed, it's completely compressed by the surrounding surfaces of the mouth comfortably. But it started getting really weird. Like, oh my God, this whole thing, my tongue's trapped in there, right? And what's funny is the tongue has consciousness. It's a conscious organ. So I opened my mouth. I was like, take in the air, take in the light, right? Take in the light. Just bizarre. So the funny thing about this stuff, though, is that it becomes meta. It's like a meta entrance point into pure consciousness, right? So you can start just thinking about the organs themselves and recognizing the organs as divinely architected for for to specifically receive sensations from this level of awareness, from physical awareness. That's why it was created. Let me bounce over somewhere else. This organs of action thing is interesting. I've been skipping this, right? I've been skipping the organs of action. But it's interesting. Hold on a second. Let's go back over to skip and sketch. Okay, bump. So the organs of action thing is interesting because what this is, I mean, you're kind of like, okay, earth, odor, I can say this, and like nose, odor. Nose and odor is an easy thing to understand, but bowels and excretion? What? How do we get to the bowels? Is it through the smell? Is it through the foul smell of excretion? Is that what they're thinking about? Or is it because it's in the lower part of the body, it's related to sort of more earthly root chakra sort of place? The genitals, this is related to the water element. Well, urination, that's wet. Sex, right? I mean, that's wet. Fire. Now, this is related to feet and locomotion. So, I mean, you could see how that might be related. I mean, because it's sort of an active, it's an active activity. It's the movement of the entire organism, which takes us heat and fire. So that's what's going on there. So these are sort of abstractions. Then the hands are specific touch sensations. Now, there's actually over in our little let me come over here. Bump. Over in our guide, let's just go down there and see what it says about these things. This is okay, so we've got the sense organs, skin. Does it even talk about this stuff here? Now, the thing is like these are not related. Like this graphic, the graphic I'm using isn't from the same page. So it's like it won't have exactly the same thing going on, unfortunately, right? Um, so maybe it doesn't discuss that, does it? Feet, genitals, bowels, it skips that. Okay, so this part here actually skips over the organs of action for some bizarre reason. That's annoying. That totally killed me, man. Um, we need to look at this stuff too. This is interesting. But anyway, what I'm going to say is the feet. So listen, here's another way of thinking about this: is if in the contemplation of the body, right? So we've contemplated the nose and smelling, right? We've contemplated the mouth and touch. We've contemplated the touch, but let's think about the locomotion and the feet, right? So, I mean, you can think about locomotion and the feet, but you could also focus in on like the joints themselves, the articulations of the joints, and I mean, that's basically hinges. Dude, those hinges are designed. The design of the human body is made to hinge, and there's a mechanical system of muscles which is used to propel it forward. It's ridiculous what's actually going on. The funny thing is because we occupy the space with our consciousness, we don't tend to think about it like this. But the contemplate the system of locomotion as pure divinity. Like it's literally the architecture of divinity. No human could get anywhere close to designing the structure of the human body. Forget about it. Even if you're just looking at the bone structure, right? The complex organic shapes which have systems built in to lubricate the joints and to nourish and to regrow and all. It's unbelievable. It's beyond human conception, right? So it's a great way of contemplation, of contemplating one of the organs of action, right? And naturally, if we're thinking about that, then you could contemplate the bowels and the genitals too as organs of action, right? Organs of action. And actually, with the genitals, I almost think the genitals should be separated out as like an individual sense, right? So to me, in a way, I mean, it's getting grouped in here with water, but it's a useful contemplation is to think of the genitals as a sensory device. Like in the same way, now our senses are located in the head generally, right? We got the eyes, nose, mouth, ears, and then there's touch built in here too. So that's like the five senses. But I'm going to say the genitals are such an extraordinary sensory experience. Granted, it's based on touch, right? But it's almost an individual sense. It's worth meditating into it. There's something to that, although it's not listed here. It's not being grouped in this list. But the point is that oftentimes when you're meditating, these intuitions will come to you, and if you meditate into them, you'll find it to be truthful in some way. And so these maps, which are created by nice people trying to map this stuff out, really useful, but probably not 100% accurate. But a very useful framework to allow you to climb through the noise, the noise of consciousness on the physical realm. What's funny about it is, like I was saying just recently, there's a high pitched hum. The computer may have a slight noise. There's the sound of my breath. There's the sound of the workers with the water pump going down there. There's a sound of a cat walking past. That's like 5 different sensory inputs, and that's just hearing. Taste, bitter coffee flavor, right? Um, Quite a lot of saliva, tongue, working a lot because I'm talking a lot. Lots of sensory input going on there. That's just 2 senses, right? Eyesight. I've got a circular light here. There's surrounded by 3 windows. Computer screen. Lots of light and color information coming in here, right? Dogs barking. Touch. Cold toes. Warm fingers. Awareness of space. Kundalini around here. My point is that there's an incredible amount of sensory input at every single moment, right? Our ego can't handle all that, so it lowers the resolution, right? It's like you're trying to watch. Well, here I'm on 4G here, so a lot of times, like my internet gets really slow at night. So if I'm trying to watch a full HD film, it will get dropped down to like 200K. That's what's happening with your senses, right? Your senses are full resolution, but the ego can't deal with it all. So it lowers the resolution down for the individual consciousness, Purusha, lowers it down, right? Or for the ego, let's say for the ego, right? Lowers the resolution down. But the full resolution is captured. All the information is captured. Is it transmitted directly to God? Yes. All the information is captured. It's kind of like the NSA, right? You know, the NSA is capturing everything we're doing on the internet, and you think it was your private email. No, everything that's done here is captured and saved up here. All of it. Actually, probably not up here, but more, maybe just around here. Because, yeah, there's a word I'm looking for here. What's the word? Anyway, the thing is we haven't actually discussed much of this yet. The only thing we've actually discussed is like the first couple of things here, right? And there's some really nice discussions here on the relationships between the tattvas and the elements and the sense of smells and stuff. And then as you move down, it gets really quite detailed into the. Oh, see, this is a good one too. Look at this. If we're talking about the mouth, right, and the sound, like here's this is amazing, dude. This is amazing. So, like, if you think about sound, it's another thing we take for granted, right? But the sound is this is like a lot of going back and forth. Sorry about this, but the sound is blank. The sound literally is the akasha, the space element sound, the abode of sound, speech, hearing, creating sound. So what's interesting, this ties into what they say about mantras, because the mantra. So for example, if I use the Om Mani Padme Hum mantra, that's not the mantra which represents Chenrezig. Chenrezig is like the Shiva of Tibetan Buddhism, right? Um, Om Mani Padme Hum doesn't represent Chenrezig. Chenrezig. Om Mani Padme Hum is Chenrezig. It's the literal essence. And so this is the thing is like, it's really easy to like say some mantra like, oh, Om Mani Padme Hum. What the hell does that mean? No, that's the literal presentation um, of the divinity. And so that's how it should be contemplated. So when you say a mantra, it should be contemplated in the same way as the contemplation of like the smell. So when we contemplate the smell as like what am I saying that was? That was a great phrase I was using for the smell. I was saying if we contemplate the smell as the transport medium for olfactory impressions, right? Then we contemplate the sound as the transit sabda is the transit medium for auditive sensations. And so, like, when we start identifying it as actually, it's not just sound. The only reason we think about sound is that's like a low resolution version of what it actually is. But when we start recognizing, when we don't allow ourselves to be deceived by the five acts of consciousness, the most important of which, in my opinion, is what's the word? Hiding. It hides the truth. It hides and reveals truth. Consciousness does this. Part of consciousness's role is hide and reveals. It creates. It preserves. Then it hides and then re-reveals. Right. So what happens is we think that it's just sound because we believe the outer version of what this invisible force is because we haven't meditated to find the truth of what it is. You get me? So when you meditate into the truth, it shall be revealed, is what I'm saying. So when you meditate into the truth of a mantra, right? When you accept the mantra as the structure of divinity itself, when you accept the mouth as the structure of divinity itself, when you recognize, let's use the word recognize, it's a better word. It's not accept, it's recognizing, it's recognition. I mean, that's what the Recognition Sutra is about. It's about recognition of the innate divinity of all levels, right? And so it's not about moving into 5D, right? It's all bullshit, right? It's not necessary, right? I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I'm just saying that it's just as divine here. You don't have to move into 5D to contemplate divinity. It's car shit, right? You can meditate on the bowels and move into divinity, right? And at the same time, gain more literal understanding of who am I, who you are, right? This is the way to do it. So when you ask, who am I? The thing to do is not just keep asking yourself, who am I? Who am I? This is like the standard Ramana Maharshi meditation, right? Who am I? The way to do it is just saying something over and over probably isn't going to help you. The way to do it is you create, you contemplate the relationships of the ideas who you think constitute you, right? Now, there's one more aspect of this, and this is theoretical at this stage, but it's a worthy addition to the discussion. Okay. Ida and Pingala. So this kind of ties into the revelation and what the hell is that word? I always forget the word. It's not. It's the where's the five acts? I had the five acts up here. What am I projecting right now? Let me just have a look for this. The five acts. Bump bump. The five acts. Where are you, buddy? Here we are. Okay. The word is the five acts. It's part of, yeah. So the five acts is also part of Kashmir Shaivism. We know that. Okay, so the five acts are creation and mission. That's one. Holding and preservation. That's two. Dissolution and reabsorption. That's three. Concealment and occlusion and forgetting. That's four. And then revealing, remembering, or grace. So the one I'm saying is the most important, probably for most people, is concealment, occlusion, and forgetting. Now, what that means is, um, let me just pop that up here quickly, just so we're all on the same page, literally. Bump. Concealment, occlusion, or forgetting. So what that means, like, I mean, there's like a universal perspective on this. You can look at this on macro level, but on the micro level, if you're meditating, this is happening all the time. And what happens is your mind is going to move in. Your mind's going to try, consciousness is going to try and move into concealment. So as you're meditating on the truth of these elements, consciousness is going to move into concealment. And that often means it moves into memories or desires. Memories or desires. Now, this is the part which is theoretical here, and I'm not sure if this is true, but I'm meditating into this, and I think there's something to this, and it's a worthy way of thinking about it at the moment. Is if you start if you start recognizing that you're thinking about memories, that's sort of moving into lunar energy of Ida or Pingala. Which is it? I've forgotten which is which. And if you're moving into desires, you're moving into fire energy. What that means is you're in the channels which are not the central channel. And so what happens is the lunar and solar energy are used to pull you away from the now moment, right? Those are used to pull you away from the now moment. And that's part of how this works. And so, in some ways, if you start thinking about desires or you start thinking about memories, just try and watch. What are you thinking about more? Are you thinking about memories more? Are you thinking about desires? When your mind loses its focus, where does it go? Does it go into memories or does it go into desires? And Ida and Pingala don't just represent the moon and the sun, they also represent the divine masculine and the divine feminine. And so what my theory is that if you're moving more into memories, you've got a fracture in the divine feminine. And if you're moving into desires, you've got a fracture in the divine masculine. That is my theory on this. So by watching the way your consciousness tries to occlude or conceal the truth of your contemplation, that will reveal to you, like in some ways, where you have to work. Yeah, I think I'm done. And this is a difficult video to listen to, probably. It's not really exciting. It's not in your face. It's not personal. It's not anything. But it's probably more important than anything else I've talked about. Um, this is literally where I'm working every single day, meditation, right? This is where I start. Like when I meditate, oh, here's another good one. Oh, this is great. Okay. So when I'm meditating, I start meditating on these things, right? And by doing this, you can catapult yourself up to here. It's almost like it just happens automatically. So now another way of doing this too is like one of the ways you can change dimensions is like I'm saying, like as you're meditating on earth, water, and fire, right? And you meditate on the specific viscosities or densities of those vibrations. Then you meditate on these This is actually quite a good. This is quite an interesting separation here, showing the difference between these things, right? And it's interesting because it's different than the other one I was showing you. So the other one has got the mapping is different. You see, this one it kind of puts these things sort of hierarchically, like it goes from one to the other, right? But on this map, it actually separates these out. So these actually are working separately. This one actually seems more accurate to me because that's kind of how I think about it. I think these things inform all of this, is what I think. But it's interesting, like contemplatively, to put it backwards because it does reveal stuff if you do it like in a retrograde way to sort of see how it works. It can sort of be quite illuminating there. Um, yeah, but if you start contemplating these different things, and for example, when you start contemplating the noise and the transitory medium of olfactory sensations as a divinely designed meta object which has no body, and you start recognizing divinity, your recognition of divinity catapults you into divinity, is what happens. So the level of your ableness to recognize divinity defines your level of awareness, right? And the problem is it's really self-reflexive, right? And it's not the kind of thing you won't do this unless it's fun. The thing is, it sounds technical and sort of intellectual here, but like when you're meditating on this, it's like fun because it's like you're moving through these hidden zones of consciousness and you can see it being concealed, and so you can sort of move around it with it's like consciousness is mobile, and so you can slip behind these veils and move between them, and that's why you do it. You do it because it's fucking awesome. That's why you do it, right? You don't do it because you're trying to be a guru or because you're trying to be intellectual or because you're trying to be a teacher. You do it because it's fucking awesome. There's nothing like this. It's the best experience you'll ever have on this planet, period. Now, it would be good to use some of these lessons and pull it down to this planet and actually use it in everyday consciousness, right? Like, how can you use this awareness? And it's funny because you can watch other people doing this because at the level of ego consciousness, everybody's doing this. And so, where do other people have their occlusions? Where are they occluding? What are they willing to allow into their consciousness as a creation and preserve it? Then, what are they occluding from consciousness? Where, because it's happening everywhere. It's happening at every single level here, right? God is occluded, right? The transitory, the transit, what is it? The transit system of the olfactory sense is occluded, right? Everything's occluded. And it's almost like each 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 level in this map is like a reflection. It's like a reflection of a reflection of a reflection. And it gets lower, it sort of gets lower density, I guess is the way to say it. It comes down here, or lower charged. And so the only way to move through the reflection is to become self-reflexive. You become self-reflexive. And that's how you move back through the veils of reflection into divinity itself. It's fucking awesome. Hmm. Anyway, that's it for today. Um, yeah. Peace out, you guys.